Today's lesson, we are going to learn about habitats and interactions. There are several questions we can ask ourselves when we are learning about habitats and interaction. One of the most appropriate questions is, why is it that some organisms or some plants or animals are well adapted to survive and reproduce in the environment? Why is it that we have some organisms that have adapted well to exist in a particular environment? Maybe let us start learning what a habitat is. Now let us learn what habitats are. All organisms, that is living things, have a place where they live, and this place is called a habitat. If there are human beings, then this place we shall call a home. Every living thing has a particular need and will only live where these needs are met by the resources available in this habitat. Some of the resources available in a habitat provide for an organism to survive and to reproduce include the following. So for an organism to stay well in an environment, it requires the following. One, it requires food. Two, it requires water. 3, it requires shelter and living space. 4, it requires a suitable temperature. Of course, an organism will not stay in a very hot area if it is not well adapted in such a hot area. Another requirement for an organism to exist well in a habitat, these organisms require mating partners for reproduction. Yes. And for this organism to exist well, they need also gases such as oxygen. Of course, it is indeed very difficult for an organism to exist somewhere where it will not breathe, where it will become difficult. Where organisms will not breathe well, of course, they will suffocate. The needs of a living thing can be divided into two. These needs can be divided into two as follows. We have biotic factors. And when we talk of biotic factors, this includes living factors that include partners of mating, organisms to eat, and organisms they may compete with for food and shelter. So such organisms that are available in such an environment are biotic factors. But we also have abiotic factors. When we talk of biotic factors, these are non-living factors that include light, wind, soil, air, and of course, temperature. So these abiotic factors that I've mentioned below, they are non-living factors that are required in an environment, in a habitat. The number of organisms staying in the same in the same area or in the same habitat will vary from time to time depending on the availability of food, water, living space, and mating partners. What happens if the same type of organisms are staying in the same area and they happen to be many? Of course, there will be war, they will compete and they will fight for space, they will fight for food and so forth. Those that will be defeated, they will be forced to migrate to another area where they can exist, and if they will not migrate, then they can be killed. That's competing and survival for the fittest. Let us look about this adaptation. When we talk of adaptation, we want to know how this particular living organism is well adapted to live in a particular environment. How well should it live in that particular environment? So what we are saying, to survive in a habitat, an organism have to adapt. There are adaptations that it has to make. Adaptations are characteristics that exist that assist organism to survive and reproduce in a particular environment. Adaptations help organisms to get food, water, to protect themselves and build homes and reproduce. So when we can give examples of how some of the animals have adapted themselves to exist in a particular environment. For instance, if we talk of a crocodile, we know that a crocodile is an animal that is found in water, but for it to adapt itself in such an environment, you'll find that the eyes of a crocodile, where they're situated on the head, it's an upper, so that once it is submerged in water, it can still see its prey. And when you look also the position of the nose, the nostrils, you'll find that the nostrils are also up, so that it can be able to breathe good air while it is still submerged in water. So we find that the crocodile is adapted in such a way that it can be able to see very well while it's still submerged in water. It can be able to see the prey and it can still breathe while it's still submerged in water. Another example that we can give an example of a chameleon. When we talk of a chameleon, we know that a chameleon has the ability to change its colors depending on the environment. One, it can change its color depending on the environment to hide, to camouflage itself against the attacker. That's one, the danger. Maybe there is an animal that wants to feed on it, so it can change its color to camouflage, to hide. Two, it can also hide so that in case it wants to catch a particular insect or a particular prey, that prey cannot see it. That's an advantage when it comes to chameleon. And we also know that it has a very tough tongue, that it is able to go in a flash of a second to catch the prey. And when we leave we can also give another example. Another example we can look is an eagle. When you look at an eagle, it has a very sharp claws. These claws have been adapted. They're specifically for catching its prey and capturing the prey and tearing it apart. Another example that we can give on adaptation, maybe we can give an example of a cheetah. A cheetah is known as the fastest animal when it comes to races. The body is streamlined so that it can move at a very fast speed, a speed of close to 120 kilometers per hour. So when you look at its body, the way it is streamlined. It has been adapted for the speed. The There are also birds called quolls. Let me write these birds. These birds called quolls are nocturnal animal. When we say they are nocturnal, we mean that they are very much active at night. At night is when they hunt and look for the food. Yes, we are told that these quolls, they are able to see very well in dim light. Why do they see very well in dim light? It depends on their eyes. Their eyes have been adapted to use dim light to see very far. Maybe you can say maybe their pupils, they can vasodilate well than other animals. And apart from animals adapting very well to the habitat, to the environment, so that they can be able to feed well, to eat well, and to reproduce in the particular environment, we also have trees. We can get an example of trees. For instance, we have trees like the gum tree, the one we call eucalyptus. When we talk of the gum tree, it is also well adapted. We normally have forest fires. And when the fires break out, we are told they can burn these trees and they lose all the leaves. But one funny thing with the gum tree, we are told they have birds that are buried deep in the trunk or in the stem, to the extent whereby this heat that is burning the tree will not destroy them. And once the tree loses all the leaves, you find that these birds immediately they sprout and they can come up. You find that all of a sudden, in a very short period, the birds will grow and quickly cover the whole tree. There will be more leaves. So you can find that this particular tree has adapted itself in a harsh environment. In case there is a fire, what should happen? So you find that it has enabled itself to have the birds hidden in the trunks or inside the stem, so that in case all the leaves have been burned, they can still grow. We are told that also in deep dense forests, where we have rainforest, you'll find that trees grow to alarming heights. And some of the trees that are shorter will compete for light. So these short trees, they have adapted themselves for them to exist in such a dense forest. What have they done? One, these trees that are growing in a densely populated area, they have ensured that they have some hooks on the stems and on the leaves, and threads like tendrils. They help them to climb over other plants to reach sunlight. What we know about sunlight is sun is very important for the manufacture of food, so the trees have to compete to ensure that they get the sunlight. So these particular trees that are existing in densely rainforest, they ensure that they can be able to climb. They have they have some hooks on their stems and their leaves. The leaves have the threads that look like tendrils, and these tendrils help them to climb up over other leaves so that they can get light. The question that we should ask ourselves, why adaptations? Why should we have these adaptations? Why? So we can have these answers. Why adaptations? Why should animals adapt? Why should animals adjust themselves to a particular environment? The following can be the possible answers why it is very important for the adaptations, for animals to adapt. One, they adapt in order to protect themselves. If they are animals, adaptation is there to enable them to protect themselves from predators. They can only protect themselves from predators when they camouflage. So we can see that adaptations here is important. Two, why should also animals adapt particular environment? They adapt the particular environment for them to survive. They can be able to survive in a hot and cold temperatures depending on how they have adapted that environment. We also say, there are animals which can be able to survive in higher temperatures Others can be able to survive well in wet areas and even dry season when they have adapted that particular environment. Why should also animals adapt themselves well? They adapt themselves so that they can be able to move from one place to another. So when you go to animals, we look at their movements. Their movements have been adapted depending on the area they are living. Why? How do they adapt themselves? We can look at the flippers, we can look at the legs, and we can also see wings. You will find that if they are birds, they will have wings that are powerful. If they are eagles, so that they can fly higher and be able to spot a prey that is very far. And even if we are talking about the eagle, it has got eyes that are almost like binoculars. They are well adapted. They can be able to see even tiny animals. When it comes to legs, depending on the environment, the legs will be appropriate for that particular environment, for that particular animal, so that organism, so that it can move well from one area to another. Also, adaptation is important when it comes to catching and eating its food. In the case of a cheetah, or maybe a cheetah, it has to run very fast so that it can catch its prey. And if we are talking that's in the case of a cheetah, it has to run very fast. And in the case we're talking of a lion, it's very strong. Once it grabs its animal, the prey, it's very difficult for the prey to get loose. Also, adaptation is there for gaseous exchange. Animals they change themselves so that they can be able to take in oxygen nicely. And the last adaptation is for reproductions. Animals, they adapt themselves so that they can reproduce at the correct time, at the correct climate, so that whatever is being reproduced, whatever is being laid can grow up well. That is adaptation when we are dealing with animals. What about when we talk of plants? How are plants adapted so that they can be able to exist well in a particular environment? Once, when we talk of plants also, they protect themselves. How do plants protect themselves from grazing animals? There are ways the plants can protect themselves from grazing animals. They can protect themselves from grazing animals by emitting toxins. For instance, if we talk of a giraffe, we know a giraffe is a herbivorous animal. Its food is used to eating leaves from tall trees. But we find that some trees which resist to be eaten by this giraffe, they ensure that they produce a lot of toxin, so that when this particular giraffe is feeding on these leaves, we'll find that they are not tasty. So that's how the trees have adapted themselves against this grazing animal. And it is not only through toxins. We are also told of thorns. There are some trees which have adapted a situation whereby they have thorns. So when we talk of grazing animals and they want to feed on them, they find that they have thorns, and it becomes difficult. Yes, it becomes difficult for these particular animals to feed on them because they have thorns. Others have spines that are dangerous. Also, when we talk of the plants, the way they've been adapted, the way they take in oxygen and carbon dioxide, depending. You will find that trees growing in a desert area, there is a way they change their stomata, because if they have their stomata on the upper side of their leaves, it implies they will lose a lot of water. So you'll find that plants growing in desert areas, they have adapted themselves in a way that they will conserve the little water they have. So their stomata are located at lower part of the leaf. This is to ensure that they protect and they remain with the little water they have. So when it comes to oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange, yes, they have adapted themselves very well so that they can be able to take in oxygen and to take in carbon dioxide at the appropriate time. Also, when we talk of the leaves, also the way they have adapted themselves, taking in water. Plants have a way of getting water. For instance, when you go where the water tables are very down in the ground, you'll find that these particular trees, they have got very long roots. When they grow, the roots go very far looking for this water. That is maybe, that's another adaptations. And we know that if roots grow, there are roots that will grow and will grow towards the direction of water. if the water is very far, they will adapt and they will have very long leaves. Then when it comes to light, we find that the plants have adapted themselves in a way where they can catch enough light. What happens is they ensure that they have large leaves. Large leaves are there to ensure that these trees can be able to take enough light so that they can manufacture their own food. And when it comes to reproduction and we talk of trees, the trees we call the unwanted trees, we call them weeds. You'll find that some weeds are very funny. They've adapted themselves in a way that they have got a very short cycle, so that by the time a farmer tries to kill them, you find that already they've matured up and they can be able to grow. So that's another way that plants can be able to adapt themselves to deal with the farmers who want to finish them faster. And when we come generally on animals, there are animals which can exist in various environments, different habitat, depending on how well they can adapt themselves. And we have animals that are restricted. They cannot exist in a number of areas because of their nature. For instance, if we talk of man and we say man is an animal, then we say man can exist very well in a habitat that is not in water but on land. And when we talk of fish, we shall say fish can only exist in an habitat where there is water. If you take fish out of water, definitely that fish will perish. And if you're a human being, you go inside the sea and so forth, and you don't have gadgets for breathing in terms of oxygen and so forth, you will surely drown. So we are saying there are a number of animals that can exist in a various environment depending on how well they can adapt that particular environment. And we are saying there are some animals that are restricted. They cannot exist in a number of habitats. We want to look what we call environmental conditions. And when we shall be looking at environmental conditions, we shall see what is environment. When we talk of environmental conditions, there are some simple questions that we ask ourselves. We ask ourselves how well an organism survives depends on how well that particular organism is adapted to the environmental condition in the area. How well that particular organism is adapted to that particular habitat, and then it will exist very well in that environmental conditions. The term environment is used to describe all things that affect a plant or an animal in its habitat. All things that affect a plant or an animal in its habitat is what we refer as an environmental condition. And we are saying these environmental conditions, they include 1, temperature. They include 1, temperature. Temperature can change, can vary from being very hot, dry, and so forth. And 2, what also can also affect the particular environment depending on whether it is wet or dry. There are some animals who will exist very well in wet area, others will not. We have also some organisms that can exist in dry areas, others may not. When also talk environmental condition, we have windy. We can have a condition that is windy, and we find that there are some organisms that will exist well in windy situations, and others will not. And also the quality of air that is present at that particular area. The quality of air. Not air, but the quality, air quality. You might have air, but not with enough oxygen that is important for existing of a particular organism in an area. So we talk of quality of air, meaning that there are some organisms that can be able to do well where there is enough air, others cannot. And apart from the quality of air, we also say another environmental condition that is important is water. There's an area where water can be available, and there's an area where water is scarce. When we give a story of a camel, we know that camels exist in areas where it's dry, where it's a desert. They have been adapted in such a way that they can be able to take water, maybe drink once after every 2 weeks. When you look at their bodies, they have humps, a place where they can store enough water. So they have been adapted in such an environment that they can be able to take water once and exist for a longer period. Also, when it comes to environment, we look the type of soil that is existing in that particular area, type of soil. When we talk of type of soil, we have soil that can easily leave water to percolate through, and after 1 or 2 days, they're dry. The soil is dry. But we have also the type of soil that can retain water for a long period. Such a soil will also affect the type of organisms that are existing within them. So we say soil can also affect. And another condition to note, it is the plants and animals. We can say in that particular environment, what kind of plants that are existing. The plants, the animal bacteria, and the fungi that live there. They also will affect the kind of environment that is existing. The fungi that is present in a particular environment will also affect the environment altogether. When we talk of interactions, we want to see how the living organism interact with environment. How does it interact? And here we say interactions between the living organism and the environment is what we call ecology. We say interaction between the living organisms and the environment is called ecology, meaning if we have ecologists are people who are interested to study these interactions between the environment and the living organism that is existing in a particular area. For instance, we say, how do these animals live together? Do they interact so that they exist together? When we talk of life, for an organism to be an organism, if it is not dead, then it's alive. We have areas that support the existence of life in an area, and we have conditions that cannot support existence life of an area. When we talk of biosphere, we are talking of a place where all life exists. Beyond biosphere, then whatever we shall be talking, there's no life altogether. This consists of the surface of the earth and its atmosphere. So the surface of the earth and atmosphere, there is life. So relationship between the surface of the earth and the atmosphere, they enable the organisms to exist in such environment. And we are saying biosphere is made up of many ecosystems, such as forest and waterland and wetland and so forth. An ecosystem, we are told an ecosystem may be on the definition of what an ecosystem is, we can say an ecosystem is formed by an organism existing with each other and their non-living things surrounding in a balanced way. I'll repeat, I'm saying an ecosystem is a system formed by organisms interacting with each other and their non-living surrounding in a balanced way. We call that one an ecosystem. So then the living organisms that are existing with one another together with the surrounding that is around them. In an ecosystem, there are many habitats in an ecosystem. Many habitats will interact, and they interact themselves within an ecosystem. Organisms in an ecosystem are interdependent. They depend on each other for survival. So what we want to say is, yes, organisms that are there, they're existing. Some organisms cannot exist alone. For them to exist, they need to depend on others. So we have organisms that will depend on others to exist. Other organisms will depend on others in a very funny way. When we talk of organisms depending on others, we can say there are three main types of interdependence. There are three main types of interdependence, of depending on one another. One of them, we call it commensalism. Commensalism, I'll write it on the board. Commensalism Yes, commensalism. When we talk of commensalism, we say this is a situation whereby an animal, such as a cow, helps a bird to get insects as it grazes on grass. What happened when we are talking about commensalism relationship? We say such a kind of symbiotic relationship is one animal or one organism is assisting another one to get its food while it is not getting any harm in any way. It is not being harmed. We call that one commensalism. For instance, we can give an example of an egret is a bird. When an animal is grazing along, when eating grass, the way it is eating that grass, somehow it disturbs the insects that are below the grass. Once these insects come up, then the bird is there to eat this insect. So we can find that there is a relationship between this kind of a bird and this kind of an animal called a cow. So the cow will be eating and it is undisturbed by this bird, while it is disturbing those insects that are coming up. Once they come up because the cow has eaten the grass, then this bird egret is there to eat. So such a kind of relationship, we call it commensalism, and we are saying the two organisms, or the animal and the bird, they don't affect and they don't harm each other in any way. We can go to second kind of relationship, and we call it mutualism. Now, when we are talking about mutualism, we want to know what kind of relationship that is existing between two organisms that are in a particular habitat. We are told this way that this is an interaction whereby both organisms benefit from each other. They benefit from each other, meaning we can give, for instance, there are some kinds of birds that like to follow maybe elephants. They like following maybe these buffaloes. You'll find that these birds are with the buffaloes, but they help buffaloes in eating some of the ticks that are on them. So this particular buffalo will benefit from this bird because it's assisting. Yes, it will benefit because it is assisting. It is assisting to kill some of the insects that are destroying it, the ticks and so forth. At the same time, this bird is also there to assist this particular animal. In the case of a danger, the bird will fly very fast, and then the buffalo know that the danger is here. So the buffalo will gain from the bird because it will be able to alert it very fast if there is any danger, and the bird will be gaining by eating the insects that are found on this particular animal. Then we say that's mutualism. But another example that we can give, we have only given an example of animals. Maybe we can give an example. We can give an example of lichens. We are told this way when it comes to lichens. Lichens consist of fungi and algae. we are saying the lichens, we are saying on mutualism, lichens consist of fungi and algae. We want to explain something to do with algae and fungi. When we talk of algae, we are told algae is a particular plant that has ability to trap sunlight and to manufacture its own food. But because this algae is existing together with the fungi, what happens is, as when algae produces its food by the energy it traps from the sunlight, fungi is there to feed on that food. It is feeding on that food. But the mutual relationship now comes here in hand, whereby fungi is there also to protect, to give protection to algae and to give it appropriate condition. So we find that algae is depending on fungi to give it protection, while fungi is depending on the algae to manufacture food so that it can feed on that food. So we can see such a kind of relationship. We say it is a mutual relationship, whereby an algae makes food from the sunlight, and from the sunlight, and the fungus uses this food by offering back protection. Then from this kind of relationship, we can go to that kind of relationship, which we call it parasitism. When we talk of parasitism, this is an interaction whereby one type of an organism called parasite. One type of an organism called parasite depends for protection and food. Depends on another organism. It lives on another organism, and this organism that this parasite organism depends on is called host. So you find that a parasite is a kind of organism that will depend on host for food and life. And we are told on this situation, we find that it's a bit funny that the host will give the parasite a shelter, and it was also, in the end, when we talk of a parasite, we find that one organism is gaining while another organism is not gaining. So the host organism is not gaining from the parasite. It is a kind of one-way relationship whereby the parasite alone is gaining from this relation and the host is not gaining. And what happens is the parasite can go to the extent whereby it can depend on the host, live with the host, eat on the host, and it can go to the extent whereby it can even kill the host organism. So the parasites obtain food and shelter from its host and may even kill the host in return. We can give an appropriate example, maybe the worms. When we talk of worms, among the human beings we have tapeworms. They will exist in our stomachs very well unless we use some medicines and drugs to kill them or to deworm ourselves. So if these worms are living within human beings and we give them enough time to exist that way, the danger that comes when we talk about this tapeworm and so forth, if we are not treated immediately, it can affect our health and our conditions, and we can suffer. And such a kind of worms can even kill us, because we're told when we talk of tapeworms, they can grow even to 2 to 3 meters within our stomachs. Also, we can talk of worms, they also affect dogs. We are told dogs have a kind of worms that affect their heart. So this kind of worms, they will be able to grow in the heart of a dog, and they will be able to multiply. If we don't treat this dog in time, they will multiply to an alarming rate, to the extent whereby the heart of a dog will fail to function accordingly. And if it fails to function accordingly, we find that this kind of parasitic relationship will end up killing the host organism to the benefit of the parasite, which might be very dangerous. What I intend, up to now, we can stop here. The next topic will be on food chains and food web. Thank you.